Have you ever watched family members show their true colors during someone's final moments? I spent the last 3 months of my grandmother's life sleeping in uncomfortable hospital chairs and learning to navigate the maze of Emory University Hospital's ICU, while my extended family suddenly developed a keen interest in her well-being that had been mysteriously absent for the previous decade. Grandma Rose had raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12, turning her cozy Buckhead home into a sanctuary where homework got done at the kitchen table and Sunday dinners were mandatory family gatherings. She'd worked her entire life as a seamstress, building a small but successful alterations business that had somehow grown into 3 locations across Atlanta by the time I graduated law school. At 29, I thought I understood the scope of her success, but I was about to learn how much she'd kept private about her financial achievements. The first sign that something was different came when Dr. Martinez pulled me aside during one of those endless February nights in the ICU waiting room. "Your grandmother has been asking for you specifically," she said, her voice carrying the gentle authority that comes from years of delivering difficult news to families. "She's been quite insistent that certain conversations happen with you present. She seems very concerned about ensuring her final wishes are properly communicated." I'd been practically living at the hospital since Grandma Rose's stroke, using my vacation days and working remotely when possible to manage both my caseload at Henderson and Associates and her care coordination. My expertise in tax law had taught me to pay attention to details that others might miss, but nothing in my professional experience had prepared me for managing the emotional complexity of watching the woman who raised me slowly slip away. That's when my extended family started materializing like vultures circling prey. Uncle Jerome, who hadn't visited Grandma Rose in over 2 years, suddenly appeared with flowers and concerned expressions. Cousin Malik, who'd borrowed $5,000 from her 3 years ago and never paid it back, started showing up with coffee and asking detailed questions about her medical prognosis. Aunt Denise, who'd openly criticized Grandma Rose's old-fashioned business practices at every family gathering, began making herself comfortable in the family waiting area and discussing property values in Buckhead with anyone who would listen. "Octavia, honey, we need to talk about practical matters," Uncle Jerome announced one Thursday afternoon, settling into the chair next to me with the confidence of someone who'd appointed himself family spokesperson. "Rose isn't getting any younger, and we all know this situation isn't improving. Have you given any thought to what happens next?" His concern for practical matters was touching, considering he'd missed her last 3 birthdays and hadn't called once during her diabetes complications the previous year. The conversations that followed revealed a level of entitlement that would have been impressive if it weren't so disgusting. Cousin Malik had apparently researched the current market value of Grandma Rose's Buckhead property and was eager to share his findings about how quickly we could liquidate assets if necessary. Aunt Denise had taken the liberty of contacting a real estate agent to get preliminary estimates on the 3 business locations, just so we're prepared when the time comes. Uncle Jerome had even consulted with an estate attorney about expediting probate processes to minimize tax implications. "We're just trying to be responsible about Rose's legacy," Aunt Denise explained, her voice dripping with the kind of false concern that barely concealed pure greed. "She worked so hard to build something meaningful, and we want to make sure everything is handled properly when she passes." The irony of hearing her talk about Grandma Rose's legacy was breathtaking, considering she'd spent years suggesting that the seamstress business was beneath our family's social aspirations. What infuriated me most was how they'd suddenly become experts on Grandma Rose's wishes and values, despite having shown minimal interest in either during her healthy years. They discussed her assets with the casual familiarity of people who'd been involved in her business decisions, when, in reality, most of them couldn't even remember the names of her longtime employees or regular customers. I started documenting their visits and comments, partly from professional habit and partly from growing suspicion about their motivations. My legal training had taught me to recognize when people's stated interests didn't align with their actions, and everything about my family's sudden attentiveness felt calculated rather than genuine. The final straw came when Uncle Jerome suggested we should start making arrangements for the business locations, since Rose probably hasn't kept up with modern management practices, and we'd need to bring everything up to current standards before any potential sale. This from a man who'd never successfully managed anything more complex than his own checking account, talking about a woman who'd built a thriving business from nothing while raising an orphaned granddaughter. As I sat in that hospital waiting room surrounded by family members who'd transformed from absent relatives into concerned heirs overnight, I realized I was about to learn just how much I didn't know about the woman who'd shaped my entire life. The morning everything changed started with Grandma Rose having her first lucid conversation in 2 weeks. Dr. Martinez found me in the cafeteria around 6 a.m., nursing my 4th cup of terrible hospital coffee and reviewing estate planning documents for a client whose situation suddenly felt uncomfortably relevant to my own life. "She's asking for you again," Dr. Martinez said, her expression more serious than usual. "But, Octavia, I need to prepare you. She's been very insistent about having a private conversation, and she's specifically requested that no other family members be present. She seems to have something important she wants to discuss while her mental clarity is strong." The weight in her voice suggested this conversation would be more significant than the usual bedside chats about hospital food and get-well cards. I found Grandma Rose propped up against pillows, looking more alert than she had since her stroke. Her eyes tracked to me immediately when I entered the room, and she gestured weakly for me to close the door completely. "Octavia, baby, we need to talk about some things before your uncles and cousins wear out the linoleum with their pacing," she said, her voice carrying echoes of the strength that had carried her through decades of building a business while raising a traumatized 12-year-old. "Grandma, you should rest," I started, but she cut me off with a look that reminded me exactly who had taught me never to back down from important conversations. "I've been resting for weeks. Now I need to talk, and you need to listen, because what I'm about to tell you is going to surprise some folks who think they know all about my business." She reached for my hand with fingers that felt impossibly fragile but gripped with unmistakable determination. "That seamstress business they keep whispering about in the hallway? The one Denise thinks is so quaint and Jerome wants to modernize?" Grandma Rose's eyes sparkled with something that looked almost mischievous. "Baby, I haven't just been hemming dresses and taking in waists for 40 years. I've been investing every spare dollar I made, buying real estate when nobody wanted it, and building something much bigger than any of them realize." She asked me to open the drawer in her bedside table and pull out a manila envelope that had been sealed with tape and marked with my name in her distinctive handwriting. Inside were bank statements, investment portfolios, and property deeds that made my hands shake as I read the numbers. The 3 alteration shop locations were just the visible tip of an empire that included residential rental properties, commercial real estate investments, and a stock portfolio that had been growing steadily for 3 decades. $2.3 million, Octavia. That's what we're talking about when your family discusses my modest estate. The number hit me like physical weight, especially when I considered how she'd lived so modestly despite having access to wealth that could have funded a completely different lifestyle. I kept it quiet because I learned a long time ago that money changes how people treat you, and I wanted to know who loved Rose the seamstress, not Rose the millionaire. The revelation recontextualized every family interaction from the past decade. Uncle Jerome's casual dismissiveness of her little sewing business, Aunt Denise's suggestions that she should consider retirement and sell the shops, Cousin Malik's assumption that she couldn't afford to forgive his loan because she was probably struggling financially like everyone else in the family. They'd all underestimated her based on assumptions about her visible lifestyle, never realizing that her modest living was a choice rather than a necessity. But here's what really matters, baby, Grandma Rose continued, her grip on my hand tightening. I've been watching how this family behaves when they think there's money involved. Jerome's been calculating property values since before I even got sick. Denise has been asking leading questions about my will for months. Malik started being extra sweet right around the time his car payment got behind. None of them seemed particularly concerned about my health until they started worrying about their inheritance. She explained that she'd been documenting their behavior too, in her own way. Phone calls that went unreturned until medical emergencies made them suddenly attentive. Holiday invitations that only came when she'd mentioned business successes. Offers to help with her finances that sounded more like fishing expeditions than genuine concern. A woman doesn't build wealth by accident, Octavia. I've been paying attention to patterns for 40 years, and the pattern with this family is crystal clear. The most devastating revelation was how alone she'd felt despite being surrounded by people who claimed to love her. You're the only one who called just to check on me when I was healthy, the only one who remembered my birthday without Facebook reminders, the only one who showed up when I had that diabetes scare last year, and you stayed until you were sure I could manage on my own. Her voice caught slightly, but her eyes remained fierce. Real love shows up when there's nothing to gain from it. As she spoke, I could hear voices in the hallway growing more animated. My newly devoted family members had arrived for their daily vigil, no doubt hoping to position themselves as the most caring relatives in case medical decisions needed to be made. The next few days felt like living in 2 different realities. During visiting hours, I watched my extended family perform elaborate displays of devotion, bringing flowers that Grandma Rose was too weak to enjoy, and having loud conversations about childhood memories that conveniently positioned them as her most beloved relatives. But during the quiet hours when monitors beeped steadily and nurses padded softly through dimmed hallways, Grandma Rose and I had conversations that revealed the true architecture of her life. I need you to understand something about wealth, baby, she whispered during one of our late-night talks when the ICU had settled into its overnight rhythm. It's not just about having money, it's about having the freedom to make choices based on your values instead of your fears. I could have lived in a mansion and driven fancy cars, but I chose to live quietly so I could see people's real intentions. Her words carried the weight of decades spent observing human nature from behind the counter of a seemingly modest business. She'd been strategic in ways I was only beginning to appreciate. The alteration shops weren't just businesses, they were community anchors that had allowed her to build relationships with everyone, from corporate executives who needed last-minute suit adjustments to working mothers who brought prom dresses for their daughters. Those relationships had led to investment opportunities, real estate tips, and business partnerships that she'd pursued quietly while everyone assumed she was just a hard-working seamstress making ends meet. "Your Uncle Jerome used to lecture me about not planning for retirement," she said, with a soft laugh that turned into a coughing fit. "If he only knew I could retire tomorrow and live comfortably for the rest of my life. But I kept working because I loved what I built, not because I needed the money." The irony wasn't lost on me that Jerome had been condescending to a woman whose net worth probably exceeded his by a factor of 10. During one particularly difficult afternoon, when Grandma Rose's breathing became labored and the medical team increased their monitoring frequency, my family's true priorities became impossible to ignore. While I focused on understanding her treatment options and communicating with doctors, Uncle Jerome spent his time in the hallway making phone calls about estate attorneys. Aunt Denise researched probate timelines on her phone. Cousin Malik asked increasingly direct questions about when we might know more about Rose's final arrangements. The breaking point came when Aunt Denise suggested we should start organizing Grandma Rose's personal effects to make things easier later. She'd somehow obtained a key to the house and wanted to begin sorting through possessions while Grandma Rose was still alive, ostensibly to spare me the burden of handling everything alone after her death. The casual way she discussed dividing up belongings belonging to a woman who was still breathing felt like a violation that went beyond simple greed into something approaching sociopathy. "Absolutely not," I said, my voice carrying the authority I'd developed through years of handling contentious legal negotiations. "Nothing in that house gets touched until Grandma Rose decides what she wants to happen with her possessions." The fury in Aunt Denise's eyes revealed exactly how much she'd been counting on having unsupervised access to whatever valuables might be hidden throughout the house. That night, Grandma Rose asked Dr. Martinez to arrange for a notary to visit the hospital. "I need to update some legal documents," she explained, "and I want to make sure everything is properly witnessed and recorded." The request sent ripples of excitement through my extended family, who assumed this meant she was finally ready to discuss the distribution of her estate in detail. What they didn't know was that Grandma Rose had been working with her attorney for months, updating her will and creating detailed instructions for how her assets should be managed. The hospital visit from the notary wasn't about creating new documents. It was about adding codicils that reflected recent observations about family behavior patterns. "I've learned more about people's character in these past months than I learned in the previous 10 years, she told me while we waited for the legal team to arrive. "Funny how crisis reveals truth, isn't it? You've been here every day because you love me." "They've been here every day because they love what they think I can give them." Her clarity about the situation was both heartbreaking and empowering. The notary session lasted almost 2 hours, with Grandma Rose providing specific instructions about asset distribution, funeral arrangements, and ongoing business management. My family members tried to position themselves strategically around the room, hoping to overhear details about their expected inheritances, but the legal team maintained professional privacy protocols that kept all discussions confidential. Afterward, Grandma Rose seemed more peaceful than she'd been since her stroke. "Whatever happens next," she said, squeezing my hand with surprising strength, "I want you to know that I'm proud of the woman you became." You have integrity that can't be bought or sold, and that's worth more than any inheritance. I had no idea that within 48 hours she would be gone, and I would discover exactly what she meant by leaving me something more valuable than money. Grandma Rose died on a Tuesday morning in March, slipping away peacefully while I held her hand, and Uncle Jerome argued with a nurse about visiting our restrictions in the hallway. Her last words were, "Take care of yourself, baby. You're stronger than you know." Within hours of her passing, my extended family had transformed from grieving relatives into an efficient inheritance-claiming operation that would have been impressive if it weren't so transparently mercenary. The funeral planning meeting at Aunt Denise's house felt more like a hostile corporate takeover than a family gathering to honor our grandmother's memory. Uncle Jerome had somehow appointed himself executor of arrangements, despite having no legal authority to do so. Cousin Malik arrived with printed copies of funeral home price comparisons, suggesting we should be practical about expenses since we'll need to preserve as much of the estate as possible. Aunt Denise had prepared a detailed timeline for settling Grandma Rose's affairs, complete with deadlines for property appraisals and asset liquidation. Now, Octavia, honey, I know this is hard, but we need to discuss the practical side of things, Uncle Jerome announced, settling into his designated role as family financial coordinator. Rose lived modestly, so we probably shouldn't expect a huge estate, but the house and the business locations should provide something meaningful for all of us. Lois, his tone carried the patronizing patience of someone explaining basic concepts to a child, despite the fact that my law degree and tax specialization made me the most qualified person in the room to handle estate matters. Cousin Malik had taken the liberty of researching comparable property sales in the Buckhead area and was eager to share his findings. The house should bring at least $400,000, maybe more, if we stage it properly and wait for the right buyer. The 3 shop locations are harder to evaluate, but I'm thinking we're looking at maybe another $200,000 total if we can find buyers who want existing businesses. His calculations were so far from reality that I almost felt sorry for him, but his presumptuous attitude eliminated any sympathy I might have otherwise felt. Aunt Denise had prepared what she called a fair distribution proposal that allocated Grandma Rose's assets based on family relationships and perceived contributions to her care during her final months. According to her calculations, Uncle Jerome deserved the largest share as the eldest son, followed by herself as the daughter who'd always been closest to Rose. Cousin Malik would receive a moderate portion in recognition of his recent attentiveness, while I would get a smaller share plus sentimental items like photo albums and personal mementos. "We know you were devoted to Grandma Rose, sweetie, and we absolutely want to recognize that," Aunt Denise explained, her voice dripping with condescension. "But we also have to be realistic about family dynamics and long-term relationships. Jerome and I have been Rose's children for 60 years. That kind of history has to mean something when we're talking about her legacy." The casual dismissal of my relationship with the woman who'd raised me felt like being slapped, but I maintained professional composure while documenting their assumptions about asset distribution. The breaking point came when Uncle Jerome suggested they should begin clearing out Grandma Rose's house immediately after the funeral. No point in letting the property sit empty when we could be preparing it for sale, he reasoned. "Octavia, since you're the youngest and most energetic, maybe you could handle the sorting and packing while Denise and I focus on the legal and financial aspects." Their plan involved me providing free labor to organize possessions they intended to divide among themselves while being excluded from decisions about property that supposedly belonged to all of us. That's when Dr. Martinez called. "Octavia, I have something that belongs to you," she said, her voice carrying unusual formality. "Your grandmother left specific instructions that I should deliver this personally and only to you. Could you come to the hospital this afternoon?" The mysterious summons felt like a lifeline in the middle of a family meeting that had become increasingly surreal. I excused myself from the inheritance planning session, claiming I needed to handle medical paperwork and final arrangements with the hospital. My family barely noticed my departure, too absorbed in their discussions about optimal timing for property sales and strategies for minimizing tax implications on assets they'd never actually seen documented. Dr. Martinez met me in her office rather than the ICU, the change of venue suggesting this conversation would be different from our previous discussions about medical treatment and end-of-life care. She handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandma Rose's distinctive handwriting, along with a smaller manila envelope that felt thick with documents. "She made me promise to give these to you personally, and only after she'd passed," Dr. Martinez explained. "She was very specific that this should happen before any family meetings about inheritance or estate planning. She said you'd understand why after you read the contents." Her expression suggested she had some idea about what the envelopes contained, though professional discretion prevented her from sharing details. I opened the letter first, my hands trembling as I unfolded pages covered with Grandma Rose's careful script. The words that greeted me would change everything I thought I knew about family loyalty, financial planning, and the true meaning of inheritance. "My dearest Octavia," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and your uncles and cousins have probably already started making plans for money they think they understand. I need you to know the truth about everything, and I need you to make some decisions that are going to surprise people who thought they had me figured out." The pages that followed detailed not just the scope of Grandma Rose's wealth, but her careful observations about family behavior over the past decade. She documented every missed birthday call, every declined dinner invitation, every request for financial help that came without corresponding offers of emotional support. Uncle Jerome, who'd borrowed $15,000 for his failed restaurant venture and never acknowledged the debt. Aunt Denise, who'd criticized Grandma Rose's old-fashioned business practices while secretly hoping to inherit them. Cousin Malik, whose sudden interest in family visits coincided perfectly with his mounting credit card debt. "But you, baby," the letter continued, "you called every Sunday just to talk. You remembered my favorite flowers on Mother's Day. You took vacation days to drive me to doctor's appointments when my diabetes was acting up, and you never once asked me about my will or my assets or what I plan to leave behind. Real love doesn't come with conditions or expectations, and yours has been the realest thing in my life for 17 years. The manila envelope contained updated legal documents that transferred her entire estate to me, along with detailed instructions about how she wanted her wealth managed and distributed. The seamstress shops would continue operating under my oversight, with longtime employees receiving ownership shares that would provide them retirement security. The real estate investments would generate passive income that could fund college scholarships for local students who needed financial assistance. The liquid assets would be mine to use as I saw fit, with one specific recommendation: don't let anyone guilt you into sharing what you didn't ask for and they didn't earn. The final paragraph made me cry in Dr. Martinez's office while she pretended to review medical charts. I'm leaving you more than money, Octavia. I'm leaving you the freedom to choose your family based on love rather than obligation. Some people will be angry about my decision, and they'll try to make you feel guilty for accepting an inheritance they think should be divided differently. But generosity isn't about being fair to people who weren't fair to you. It's about blessing people who showed up with their whole hearts when showing up mattered. The family meeting that evening went exactly as Grandma Rose had predicted. When I shared the contents of her will, Uncle Jerome's first reaction was denial, followed quickly by accusations that I'd manipulated an elderly woman during her vulnerable final months. Aunt Denise suggested that Grandma Rose must have been mentally compromised when she updated her legal documents, despite having no evidence to support that claim. Cousin Malik oscillated between hurt feelings and transparent attempts to negotiate for a portion of an inheritance that had never belonged to him. "This isn't what Rose would have wanted," Uncle Jerome declared, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd rarely bothered to ask Rose what she actually wanted during her healthy years. "Family wealth should stay in the family, and that means all of us, not just one person who happened to spend more time at the hospital." His definition of family apparently included people who treated her like a backup plan rather than a priority. The threats came next. Legal challenges about mental competency, claims about undue influence, suggestions that I owed them portions of an inheritance based on their biological relationships to Grandma Rose, regardless of the quality of those relationships. But my legal training served me well during these conversations. The updated will was airtight, executed properly, and witnessed by medical professionals who could testify about Grandma Rose's mental clarity during the signing process. 3 years later, I'm writing this from the home office I created in Grandma Rose's old sewing room, surrounded by the business she built and the community she nurtured. The seamstress shops now employ 12 people full-time, including 3 of my former family members who eventually swallowed their pride and asked for jobs when their other opportunities didn't pan out. The scholarship fund has helped 18 local students attend college without crushing debt. My own life has expanded in ways I never imagined possible when I was working 80-hour weeks and struggling to pay off law school loans. The most valuable part of Grandma Rose's inheritance wasn't the money, though financial security has certainly improved my quality of life. It was the permission to stop accepting treatment that didn't reflect my worth and the resources to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. When people show you who they are during your most vulnerable moments, believe them the first time. Your family of origin gives you genetics and early experiences, but your chosen family gives you the love that helps you thrive. What relationships are you ready to choose based on how people treat you when you have nothing to offer them except your authentic self?